Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars talking all things BYU. It does seem like the Cougs have three viable options at quarterback, viable enough that we're unsure which of the three will be named the starter when it comes week 1 in Provo. If you're a betting man, if you had to say, hey, this is the guy, who is BYU starting quarterback?
If you were asking me if they're starting a game tomorrow, I would put my money on McKay Hillstead. But to your point, Drake, all three of the candidates here, Bear Bachmeyer, Trayson Bourget, and I already mentioned Hillstead. I think any one of them come game 1 in just over a month's time, it feels like. We're already in July. It's a crazy thing we're playing a game next month. But that's how quickly it's going to be here. But I think if you were to ask me if they're starting a game tomorrow, it's McKay Hillstead. But I can't discount the other two come training camp over the month-long camp they'll hold in August.
Yeah, Jake Retzlaff last year, QBR-wise, was 11th in the Big 12. Yeah. You are losing a below-average quarterback. The 50th QBR guy in the country, somewhere around that. You're losing a below-average Power 4 Big 12 quarterback based on those numbers. Failed to throw for 230-plus yards in 9 of 11 wins, I believe is the official stat. This is not a gunslinger. He is not the end-all, be-all to quarterbacks in the conference. You didn't lose Sam Leavitt. You didn't lose Sawyer Robertson. Just analytically, and I know we want to laud what he did because he helped BYU win 11 games, but analytically, you're not in the worst spot with it. You just needed an average or above-average quarterback to replace him, and BYU's kind of in the same spot from a signal caller standpoint. Am I wrong there?
No, see, my argument, Drake, is that BYU among the programs in the Big 12, that if most programs would lose their starting quarterback in this manner, Drake, a lot of them would be like dead and buried. It just feels that way. But you point out that the metrics say that Jake, was a middling quarterback at best last year, and I believe that. BYU was the sum total of its parts. I'm talking about had a very good defense, had an above-average offense, it had elite special teams, and all three phases contributed to getting BYU to 11-2. You mentioned a Sam Leavitt, you mentioned a Sawyer Robertson, even an Avery Johnson from Kansas State. You take any one of those guys off of that roster, and I would say that those programs are in infinitely worse shape than the BYU football program is, because I think BYU's depth and the guys that they returned from last year's squad will make up the difference. And if they can get average quarterback play, they should be in a relatively similar spot, it feels like, come this fall.
Yeah, Jake, if you are Kalani Sitake, and this is tough. I know you will both be at Big 12 Media Days, and the first question, it is a travesty to all journalism, but the first question he gets is not about the quarterback room, and I foresee his response being, here is our statement as a university. This is the final time I'll address it. I'd like to talk about the rest of my team for the remainder of media days. I see that being the way he approaches it. Otherwise, 10 of his 15 questions will be related to Jake Retzlaff or the next quarterback at BYU. If you're him, how do you handle this in a locker room full of guys who expected to have a senior-led quarterback room next year?
I think you go to the guys and say, hey, what's happened has happened. Jake is going elsewhere. We have to move forward on our own. And that's the thing, is that it's tough to see a guy like Jake walk away from a program that I'm sure guys like Chase Roberts, for example, were expecting to come back and have a really big senior year alongside a senior quarterback in Jake Retzlaff. The message from Kalani Sitake and his staff has to be, guys, what's happened is in the past. We have to look forward. We have to rally around one another, and we got to go do our thing. And we cannot let what happened affect us going forward, because hindsight is only going to hurt BYU. You have to have the mindset of, okay, burn the boats, to use that expression, and move forward here. And I think BYU will be better served just to focus on what they have right now. And I think that Kalani Sitake, to your point, he will probably address that question early on in media days and try and get away from it. I still expect some people to try and come up with so-called creative methods to get another answer out of him, though.
Have the Cougars lost a win or two in all of this, or do you feel like the expectation should remain the same?
I think that Jake Retzlaff's probably worth 1 to 2 wins. Yes. So I've made this argument. I'll make it here as well, is that if BYU, in my mind, I thought the ceiling maybe was like a 10-2 season this year. And I thought I would put them in the mix for the Big 12 title game and maybe a college football playoff berth, because I just think the Big 12 is going to be a dog-eat-dog conference just based on how things looked last year. So if BYU, their ceiling with Jake Retzlaff was 10-2, maybe it drops the ceiling to 8-4, 9-3 at the very best if everything goes right. But if the Big 12 is as cutthroat as it appears it could be, Drake, you can still find yourself in the mix. We all know how crazy it got towards the end of the season last year with regards to who was going to go to that Big 12 title game. So I think the biggest thing for BYU is focus on what you control the controllable narrative there. And if they do that, they could have, I think, a very successful season, all things considered.
Let's take out the circumstance, which is a hard thing to do, but this is a football podcast or a college athletics podcast. Let's take out the circumstance. A contender is without its starting quarterback. Should the rest of the conference be celebrating this?
Yeah, I got no problem saying that. I cover BYU for a living, and I'm saying that. The thing is, BYU, when you lose a starting quarterback, there's just no denying that it's going to have an impact on your football program. And yes, like I said, if maybe 10-2 was their ceiling with Jake, it drops them to 8-4. Well, that probably puts them in that second tier of conference teams in the Big 12. So yeah, the other contenders, the Arizona States, the Texas Techs, the Kansas States, etc., they should be lauding the fact that BYU doesn't have their QB.
Yeah, that's going to be a huge piece in all of this. Losing a senior quarterback and losing a couple of wins is obviously on the table. And I think, the huge piece is locker room material for an opposing team. They now see you as this injured animal in the forest because you're without one of the most important positions in all of football. But what if? Yeah, what you got?
Can I make a counterpoint to that? Because you and I both know BYU thrived last year on the disrespect card. Remember, they went to UCF as an undefeated team and were an underdog to a sub-500 UCF Knight squad. And I can tell you, that squad was irate, the fact that they were a road dog to a sub-500 team. Now that they're going to be that proverbial wounded animal, I agree that they're going to be other teams licking their chops thinking, all right, we got the Cougars right where we want them. I think BYU on the other side is going to be thinking, hey, we know what you think you got, but we're going to spring a trap on you guys, and we're going to use that disrespect card to fire ourselves up.
And thanks to FanDuel.com, I was able to buy a house because BYU was an underdog against UCF in that game, which was just insanity. And the Cougars pulled it off for all of us that went to FanDuel and were involved in that action. What are the odds? I'll end it here, and I would like to get into some Pac-12 talk because you're out in the West Coast. KSL cover a ton of that stuff. Give me... what if McKay Hillstead or Bachmeier or what if one of these guys are worth 2 or 3 wins? Is there an opportunity to say, oh, shoot, we didn't understand there was kind of that diamond in the rough waiting?
Yeah, that absolutely is an argument there, but they obviously are going to have to prove it on the field. The good news is 2 of the quarterbacks in this mix already have Division I starting experience in Hillstead and Bourget. Now they're at the G6 level. They haven't participated in a game at the Power 4 level, so that obviously is a step up in competition. But the fact that they have starting experience gives them the added advantage of knowing what to expect when they take the field. I think the biggest thing for BYU is that they got to find one of these quarterbacks, and like I said, you maybe expect average quarterback play out of them. Everybody else around them, the running backs, offensive line, wide receivers on offense, and then Jay Hill's defense, it's got to take another step forward here. It was top 30, top 40 last year. If they're top 20 this year, that's going to keep BYU in some really, really close ball games. And if they can grind out extra wins, that would be a big, big boost to the ego of BYU football.
Yeah, I think it's a very important season for BYU to win. You have such a massive recruiting class coming in that you're 1-6-6 away from having guys jump ship. I know Baylor saw it a couple of years ago after finishing up a Sugar Bowl season with a bowl loss to Air Force. They lost some really good recruits, top-end recruits, because those guys wanted to compete for a college football playoff. You don't want to be in that position if you're BYU in 2025. Coming up, new look Pac-12. Does that mean that we're back to a Power 5? This is the Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover.